Looking for a way to reconnect and reset? Awaken Pittsburgh offers free guided meditations open to everyone, online and in person, on the first and third Wednesdays, second Saturdays, and third Mondays of each month. Each session includes guided practice, reflection, and space for questions and support. No experience needed. Sign up on Eventbrite and join their community.
Hello friends, my name is Stephanie Romero and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. Welcome to Awaken Pittsburgh's Ripple Effect podcast. Today's episode brings exciting news about a major step forward for accessible community healing. We are honored to announce that Awaken Pittsburgh is officially assuming stewardship of the Integrative Community Therapy, also known as ICT, program. This is a powerful program previously pioneered and championed by Visible Hands Collaborative, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing this innovative model of solidarity care from Brazil to the United States. As Visible Hands Collaborative concludes its organizational operation, this transition ensures that the vital work of ICT that they have pioneered will continue seamlessly and thrive. ICT is a peer-facilitated, group-based practice that empowers people to share their lived experiences, listen deeply, and find healing and resilience together. By integrating ICT into our work, we are significantly expanding the ways we can support mental health and well-being in Pittsburgh and beyond. In this episode, we explore why this adoption matters, what ICT brings to our collective mission, and how together we'll continue to ripple out positive change across our communities. To talk about this transition, our guest today is Dr. Kenneth Thompson, one of the founders of Visible Hands Collaborative. Dr. Thompson is a psychiatrist and advocate whose career has focused on the intersection of public health, public policy, and the struggle for health equity. He has held significant roles in the field, including serving as Director of Medical Affairs at the Center for Mental Health Services in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Locally, he was the chief psychiatrist for Pittsburgh's refugee population and is now chief medical officer of the Pennsylvania Psychiatric Leadership Council. He is also coming on board to Awaken Pittsburgh as the Integrative Community Therapy Senior Engagement Director. Ken, I'm excited to have this conversation. We are in a particular moment for Awaken Pittsburgh and Visible Hands Collaborative that I'm just excited to unpack with you during this conversation.
Likewise, and just for the audience's awareness, I was just gushing about how excited I am to be working with you and to see the amazing work that Awaken Pittsburgh has done, and to imagine the things that we can do with you by bringing integrative community therapy and solidarity care into the mix of mindfulness and self-care that you guys have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, actually, just a little plug. Next year is our 10-year anniversary.
Oh, so we're gonna have a big anniversary party at some point?
Something, we'll do something. Stay tuned. Yeah. Well, I think we could start. Like, I would just love to hear a little bit about your journey in being someone who works in mental health. How did you come to that?
Well, it goes back a long way. I knew that I was going to be a psychiatrist, uh, probably sometime in high school or early in college. And the reason for that is that my father was a physician, and I had been, I don't know if I was cultivated to be a physician. I was a firstborn. Um, I like studies. I did okay in school. So thinking about becoming a doctor wasn't out of hand. And and I spent a lot of time, watching my father and being involved um, in parts of his career. So I knew I was going to be a physician, but it was when I really discovered that it was possible to kind of think about psychiatry as a combination of both medicine and other stuff that I really cared about, which is like, how people relate to each other, what what it is that we think and do with our lives, and how we put our lives together. Um, to how that combined with hard science, like how nerves worked and stuff like that. When I understood that, I realized that it was going to be a kind of career that I was really potentially interested in wanting to do. So went to college, majored in psychology, and went to medical school. Um, and I worked for a year before I went to medical school because I wanted to. I worked at McLean Hospital, the psychiatric hospital up in Boston, and learned a tremendous amount of psychiatry working as a mental health worker. And I did that mostly because I wanted to get a sense of what healthcare was like in addition to being a doctor. So, so fortunately, I got into medical school, went to Boston University, and my desire to be a psychiatrist started to wobble a little bit. I got interested in primary medical care and maybe becoming an internist or a family practice doc. Uh, and I applied actually for my residency both in internal medicine and in psychiatry. But in the process of doing that, I realized that what I really wanted to do was the psychiatry. I decided I was just going to stick with that, and ended up doing my residency in psychiatry in the Bronx at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Jacobi Hospital, Bronx State, and really had an extraordinary opportunity to uh, to be a young psychiatrist. And After that, the federal government paid my way through medical school, so I owed time. Uh, I had no debt, but I owed time, and they wanted to send me to the deep south or to a reservation, to a reservation that I had spent some time on while I was a medical student, and it did not. It was it was a tough call, but in the end, my wife and I decided that we probably would have a hard time at the reservation. It was Pine Ridge, which is where Wounded Knee is, and I'd already been there and had had some challenges. Um, I don't think because of myself, but because of the long history of very difficult circumstances there. But anyhow, I ended up doing something called a National Research Service Award instead of going to the reservation or into the Deep South, which allowed me to work with homeless people in New Haven, Connecticut. And there I got very involved in developing programs and created actually a program that still exists in New Haven for homeless men. um, which and that fellowship, then I got recruited to Pittsburgh, which is where I'm from. I was born in New York City, but I moved here when the Pirates beat the Yankees in 1960. I told my father that we had to leave the loser town, and we came to Pittsburgh. Actually, I told my father and mother. I don't want to leave my mother out of the story there. Um, we came to Pittsburgh, and then when I was um, 18, that's when I went off to college in Ohio. But then 20 years later, I came back. I got recruited to the University of Pittsburgh, to Western Psych, and came back. And my job was to do work around community mental health, community psychiatry, which I did. And that process led me into the last 30 plus years working here in Pittsburgh in community mental health in a variety of settings. I continued to remain interested in primary healthcare and worked a lot in what are called federally qualified health centers. So I brought my conviction is that you can't really cut people off at the neck. Their bodies and their minds travel around together. And if you're doing good medicine, you have to be doing good psychiatry. And if you're doing good psychiatry, you have to be doing good medicine. So we created a program at the Squirrel Hill Health Center to really do what I would call state-of-the-art sort of, we call it fused care, whole person health services. And did that particularly with the refugee community in Pittsburgh, but other folks who had a variety of psychiatric issues and medical challenges. And I worked in a number of other settings, which I won't go into listing, but I've had a lot of exposure, hospitals. I did a stint as the medical director for the Center for Mental Health Services in the federal government, which is part of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. So I've had exposure to, federal and even international activities, in part because of that. But what got me to where we are today is that I've been really interested in the idea that our capacity to take care of people clinically on a one-on-one basis, while it's very important, it's unbelievably inefficient. We have to wait till people are ill in order to be able to do anything to be useful. And then we don't even try to do anything for people because we're not seeing them. We don't see them unless we can bill for them. And we can only bill if they have a diagnosis. So the whole idea of prevention or health promotion was stuff that I really always been interested in, would really like to have done, but there was really no way to get at it. And then my daughter got interested in psychiatry, and she got interested in potentially going to other parts of the world to learn about psychiatry. Her husband, now husband, then boyfriend, was a guy who was studying Brazil and a political scientist for his PhD. And they both said, well, we want to go to Brazil. And I said, well, a long time ago, I heard about a program in Brazil where they were doing, in the favelas, which are the shanty towns, they were doing these large groups for the community. And a psychiatrist and other mental health people would run these groups. And it was a way for people to deal with the challenges and stresses that they had on a day-to-day basis. And I said, that would be an interesting thing to check out. I'd heard nothing other than this sort of rumor about it. And the very specific story was that this guy had started these groups, and the first group he ran, a woman came in and said she couldn't sleep. And later on, I heard more specifics about that, and maybe we'll get to that at some point in this discussion. But at any rate, she was going to go check this out, and we had found out where this doc was. I'd run into some people in another meeting, actually in the UK, some Brazilians, who told me, yes, this actually exists, this is happening, there are people doing it. So my daughter Alice and her boyfriend, now husband David, We're all set to go to Brazil in March of 2020. And it just, as you can guess, never happened. But what did happen is that Alice decided that she was going to spend her time. She had this, the medical school was closed for a brief while. She was going to medical school to become a psychiatrist. Um, or she decided to become a psychiatrist. So she got on the internet and she found a group meeting that was called Integrative Community Therapy that was being held on Zoom by a couple of expatriates from America who lived in Geneva, Switzerland. And she got online and they went through what we now know of as an ICT round. And Alice called me up and said, Dad, I just was on this thing and it's very profound and we need to connect up with this. We need to connect up with this. So this group in Switzerland had a connection to Brazil and had learned how to do ICT. And they were, because of the pandemic, they had moved it online. And because it was online, we could find it. And because Alice found it, we were able to make connection with them. And then with a guy named Adalberto Barreto, who's the psychiatrist who, along with the community, the favela, created ICT. We were able to get hold of Adalberto, and we convinced Adalberto that he could do a training for people in the United States online. And we launched that. We then decided to try to get a nonprofit together so we could get some money so we could pay him to do this. And that basically launched Visible Hands Collaborative. And over the last now 4 years, we managed to train probably about maybe 6 cohorts of around 20 to 30 people as ICT facilitators. We've done particularly well in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where we have now 3 cohorts. We've started to train some people to be trainers. We've been working with 2 women from Mexico City, Sylvia and Nyeka, who are trainers, and we've been, I think, kind of demonstrating that ICT is something that can work in the United States, and that it's a way to get beyond the individual, very, as I said, very isolating kind of way that we tend to practice. And that in that process, Stephanie, I got to meet you, I think through Bridget, who we had hired who was the executive director for Visible Hands, and then we've just been in conversation since.
So, Ken, I just want to follow up on one thing that you said that I think maybe, lay people out there might not understand. And it's the difference between, I guess, what I might label, and you might have a better word for it, traditional psychiatry and community-based mental health, a psychiatrist that's doing community mental health. So how does your career as a community mental health psychiatrist, like, what's the difference there?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to think about this. The sort of original idea of community psychiatry was that for people who had been in institutions, so you would be a psychiatrist in the institution. When we started the process of moving people into the community, it became important to have psychiatrists who were in the community where the people were. Of course, before we moved people out of the institutions, there was, a private practice of psychiatry in which you might go see a therapist, a psychotherapist, or an analyst who might be a psychiatrist. So there was a sort of private practice of psychiatry. Community psychiatry tends to not only be about being in the community, it also tends to mean relying on public funding to do it. So we're taking care of people who don't have the money or the insurance to cover the private psychiatric care that they might have gotten. But it goes beyond that, though, to another sort of, I think, thing that's in the origination of the idea that these are doctors who are in the community as opposed to in the institution. As a community psychiatrist, part of what we think about is what it is that the person who is in front of you, who you're taking care of, what their lives are about, and how they find a place and meaning in the community that they live in. That's, I mean, you'd think that that would be part of what private psychiatrists do as well, but we're very explicit about it, partly because people who are suffering from fairly significant psychiatric disorders, finding a fit in the community is not such an easy thing to do all the time. So it's partly related to that. I think, and this was probably what allowed me to imagine something like ICT, existing, is that we also tend to recognize that in the community there are resources that help people be healthy or to recover or to find some meaning or purpose. So the community has a lot of meanings in this particular way. I guess the difference is that it's obviously not an institution, though. I'll bracket that by saying that you could be community oriented. You can be community oriented and be in an institution. Um, but the fundamental issue is that you imagine and value and think about people in the context of the community that they live in, and that's why when we talk about ICT, the role of the community in helping people find a way to live and manage their challenges is not such a far stretch. It's kind of part of our thinking already.
That was really helpful. And it also just kind of helps me really understand your attraction to ICT as a modality that could be supportive of people in a community-based practice, right? That alignment makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
That explanation was super helpful. I think what I'm curious about is, so for people listening, I heard about Visible Hands Collaborative really shortly after it got set up somehow. I don't even remember how, and was really intrigued because in my experience in building Awaken Pittsburgh and providing mindfulness-based programming and supports through the community, it's really clear that mindfulness is really helpful with people for a lot of things, and some people need other modalities as well. Like it's not enough for everyone, right? And so I've been really keen on exploring what other modalities that are not therapy billable kind of services could we be integrating into what we do at Awaken, so that we are really offering people, I always love the word smorgasbord, or suite of services that they could check out and find what really speaks to them and what really is supportive of them in a very holistic kind of way, right? And one of the things that I love about ICT is that often we think of meditation as a very individual, introspective, solitary practice. And ICT is like the flip side of the coin. Like we need to do the internal work of supporting our mental health and well-being, learning to manage our thoughts and emotions, self-regulate, all of those things that are, internal work, but we're social creatures. And so where does that all play out? It plays out in our relationships, right? And sometimes we don't even realize we're dysfunctional until someone points it out, right? Or that the way we're responding is not helpful, or, all of the things that we can only learn about ourselves in our relationships and through community. Um, So for me, ICT is just such the flip side of the coin to the work we're doing with meditation and mindfulness. And I saw that immediately, and that's why I was like, some of my program deliverers need to get trained in this. We need to start incorporating it to help be more holistic and more um, like full person in our approach, right? To give our participants more voice and agency as opposed to just sitting and hearing what we're saying and trying to practice. But I guess I'm really curious, where do you, like everything that I've said, but where do you see synergy and what do you think is exciting about working alongside us now?
Well, first of all, I just have to say, smorgasbord. It is a great word. It's always been a great word. Don't ask me to spell it exactly because I might get it wrong. I'm not 100% sure, but I do think the world that we live in is very complex and a totality that has pieces that blend into each other and it's a really interesting sort of thing to try to figure out how to tease any of it apart so that you can talk about it. One way I think about this, which I don't know if it's helpful or not, um, people are both um, individuals and they are part of a group. And much like light is, there's the famous duality of light, the paradox of light. Life, Light is a photon, a particle, and it's a wave at the same time. Um, and I think people are both themselves and they're parts of a group at the same time. And that's just, they're interpenetrated with each other. So unless you find a way that you're addressing both those aspects in some way, then there's a part of the process that's being left behind. So that's one element. I think another element, and this became clear to me. I mentioned Adalberto Barreto, who's the psychiatrist who created ICT with the favela that he was working in, which is called Quatro Varas, which means the four sticks. And it's called the four sticks. I should just mention this so that there's a little reference, because well, the story they tell is of a father, an old man who had several children, had four children, and he sent each of them out into the woods to bring him a stick. And they brought him a stick, each of them individually, and he would take the stick and break it over his knee. And then he said, I want all four of you to go out in the woods, bring me a stick. And they came together, and then the four of them offered him the four sticks together. And the father tried to break it over his knee, couldn't do it. So he said, the lesson here is that when you are together, you are much stronger. Okay. So Quatrovara is the name of the favela that, with Alberto, invented ICT, which is in fact a coming together to create greater strength. Um, uh, this idea that you have a community of people that can help each of the individuals and each of the individuals helping the community, I think has been really the critical insight. And what Alberto said to me was one of the reasons it's so important is that the sort of chief, maybe the chief pathology or the chief thing that's causing us suffering in the world right now is that we have lost our ability to connect and relate to each other at the level and in the way that we need to for the world that we live in. And so his position is that we need to help people develop the skills inside themselves and the skills outside themselves to be in relationship with themselves and with each other. And unless people are attending to that, it doesn't get done. So the ICT is really the sort of mirror image of mindfulness, in that you're taking yourself into the social world, and mindfulness is the mirror image of the social world, in that you're pulling yourself out of it to focus on your inner world. And I think that duality is really profoundly captured in what we're doing. And I gotta say, in psychiatry or in mental health in general, I don't think there's much attention to putting these aspects together. I hadn't really realized, and to be honest with you, I could be without ICT, I would be kind of critical of the kind of clinical practice that I do, because it's very isolating. One of the things we hear from patients is, I feel like I'm the only person with this problem, and they don't get any resources from the community. They just get me, or they might get their therapist and the medicines I give them. And that's not the same thing as, having other people give you a pat on the back, or say, we're really glad to have you with us today. Um, it's not the same thing. Now, it's good, you know. I think it's really important that people are able to self-manage their emotions, be aware of themselves, all those kinds of capacities. Um, but if we use any muscle too much without the counterbalance, you get all bulked up, but you can't straighten your arm out, because the only muscle you got is your bicep. So how would we make it possible for people to be both social and with themselves? And truthfully, I think the combination of the work that we've been doing and the work that you guys are doing just makes a lot of sense. On top of that, and I think you'll probably agree with me on this. Pragmatically, we just found out that it actually kind of works together.
Yeah, it is working together. It is working together. So for folks listening, we've begun to integrate ICT into our programming, into presentations and staff retreats and things like that. And it's actually quite beautiful. It's actually quite beautiful. And the thing that was going through my mind is the inter versus intra, right? So it's the same dynamic, but one is inter and one is intra, like within and between. And I think that that's, yeah, just a more complete
Yeah.
and supportive way to think about providing these kind of non-therapeutic mental health supports for folks. Um,
Yeah, that one of the challenges we had was that it's called integrative community therapy, because in Brazil they call it that in Portuguese, and I won't macerate the Portuguese language by trying to say it in Portuguese, but they use the word therapy, and that's obviously a challenge here in the United States, because that's a very specific kind of concept, that you are doing something to cure or address a particular form of pathology. So it's therapy for this condition. And the challenge is that for ICT, it's actually therapeutic. It is helpful for people, but it is not a specific therapy for a specific condition. And that's a challenge we have to sort of sort through, because I think people can understand that as a concept, but within the legal framework of the world, it's a little harder to sort through, and it's been a challenge to figure out how to talk about it. And I guess a little bit it's been a confusion for people, because they expect it to be like a therapy, and while it is, as I said, therapeutic, it's run by, it can be run by community members who are just trained to facilitate. It's not it doesn't require any advanced degrees or any particular technical capacity to do a particular form of therapy. It's a much more open to non-expertise than a therapeutic intervention would be, or a therapy intervention would be.
I like the way you're framing that because I think, the idea of there's something wrong as opposed to coming at things from the perspective of we all have the innate ability to heal and innate wisdom, and strengths, a real strengths or asset-based approach versus there's something we need to fix, right? I really prefer the asset or the strengths-based approach. And I think that both the mindfulness practices that Awaken has been offering and ICT just honors that there's strength, there's healing, and there's potentiality, and there's wisdom in us, latent maybe, but still there. And all we can do is just create the conditions for that to come out, right?
Right.
And for the connections to happen and relationships to build and healing. And so I think that that's another piece where I really see synergy between these two modalities or multiple modalities. And I also think that, you were naming the isolation that people feel and the need for connection a little earlier. And I think about the culture of the global South and how this is coming out of the global South and, our pretty isolationalist kind of approach to the way we live and how this is kind of creating a new way of relating and teaching a new way of being together, that feels exciting to me.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of a cultural shift from our we can't touch each other, we can't really share emotions, and I think it's in fact I don't think that we were quite so uptight in the past, and clearly there are reasons that we are uptight. I don't want to take away from that, but we've got to figure out how to create environments where we are not always uptight, or where we can feel free and safe at the same time. So I think that's a task for our society to sort of work through, and I think that ICT is a potential venue for that. In a previous conversation with you, Steffi, you used a term that I think is absolutely brilliant, which is that you described ICT as being essentially an accessible, supportive community. And the idea of ICT that makes it different than other groups is that the usual form of group therapy has an expert leader and then the group members. And so it's not really a community. If it's a community in anything, it might be a dictatorship, but it's not a human interactional community in the sense of in that it's structured by the people who are in it. It's structured by the expert. ICT is structured by the people who are in it, and it's structured by people who are peers to the people who are facilitated by people who are peers to the people who are in it. That's the ideal way to do it. It turns out it's actually much harder for mental health professionals such as myself to run an ICT because we're so focused on that pathology rather than thinking about what it is that makes everybody strong and connected. But this idea that it is an accessible, supportive community has two implications to it. One of them is that it helps people to be in a community that's supportive, that's good for people. They can benefit from the resources and the capacity of that community. But also, and this is another element that kind of comes out of ICT, but also it means that the community itself benefits from having people who are members who belong to it and who care about it. So So when we have the problem of individuals who feel isolated and disconnected, and we have communities that are not functioning or not working well, the ICT, and I have to say mindfulness as a baseline for people to be able to manage the issues of being in an ICT or in a community, that helps us both mend the human beings who are in the community and mend the community itself at the same time. And that's a power that we don't ordinarily think about, mental health services having. We think really only about the individual. And while that's really important, and I've done it my whole life, I've also seen that if the community is not functioning well, there's not a lot you can do for individuals that won't be undone by the community itself very shortly thereafter.
Yeah, that's very well stated. I've, worked in schools for a really good part of my career, both as an educator and then later as Awaken coming in. And I have seen firsthand that if I work with a subset of people in the school system, a group of kids, a group of teachers, but the system is toxic, right? That no matter what I do with those kids or teachers, they just keep hitting up against the toxicity of the system that they're in, and they're not fully able to integrate what we're doing together or implement it in their lives because they just feel like they're getting squashed down, right? And there really needs to be the larger culture shift to support that
Yep.
practice, different way of being, whatever words you want to use there, for it to be most effective, which is one of the reasons why I love the family-based work we're doing in community, where we're working with parents and kids together. They have age-appropriate lessons and then they come back together because there you're getting at the system. You're getting at this, and it's a community, it's a neighborhood. We're in a neighborhood where they all live, they work, they pray together, and so there I feel hopeful. And how powerful would that be if then we could do ICT rounds in those communities as continuation of care?
Yeah, great. I think part of this means what we're doing is we're thinking about human beings really in their fullness, right? We're not just trying to see it's good to see the individual. It's fine to see the individual, right? But the individual always exists in some context. And there are various different kinds of contexts, right? There's your family, there's the community you live in, there's the larger nation that we're in, there's the world that we're on. And each of those elements, there's a way and a place to be able to I don't want to claim that you can make things happen or shame, but what you can do is work with people. You can work with people individually, you can work with people in families, you can work with people in communities. And the benefit of the ICT is it starts to allow us to work with people in communities. And that adds to the work that you've been doing with individuals and families. It's just that allows us to be on more levels all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we start to maybe wind the conversation down, I want to just shift to, naming that Awaken Pittsburgh is taking on integrative community therapy as a programming stream. We are interested in stewarding that and growing it and expanding it, and really just love the idea that it's going to be part of the fabric of who we are. And as that, you're also stepping into a role with us to help us steward and grow that programming. And I guess I'm really curious, how you are feeling about that shift, maybe something you're excited about or anything you want to share about how that is for you right now.
Well, 5 years ago, when we started talking about bringing ICT here and we were learning about it, um, we created the nonprofit that we did to bring it over, which uh, we got started, we got some money, we did some work, and and we've kind of launched it enough that that we were lucky that we launched it enough that you were able to see it and participate in it, and a number of other people as well, so that there's something to hand off out of the nonprofit that we started to Awaken, and to, I think, make a step up. Um, the challenge, I think, the challenge for us in both the things that we do, both the work you've been doing with Awaken and with ICT, is that we had a way of doing. We had a resource to offer people, to help people um, develop themselves and their relationships. The challenge is always finding the platform where you can offer that from. And that's a really hard challenge, I think. Um, it was particularly challenging on the ICT side, because this idea of people coming together in large groups to talk about their feelings is not your first go in American culture right now. It's desperately needed, and people will say they want it, but we're walled off from it. So it has been a challenge to introduce it to the United States. Um, I think we've made enough ground that we have a beachhead, maybe a too militaristic, maybe a toehold that is growable now, and the fact that we're able to do it um, with you guys as part of you, um, I think is just an extraordinary opportunity to put together a way of understanding and thinking about how we help people deal with the ongoing strains and stresses of our society and our lives without making them have to go into formal therapy or have to go see a psychiatrist necessarily. Some may need to go see a psychiatrist. I'm not going to say that nobody should ever see a psychiatrist again, but it may be possible that people can benefit from this and not need to go to see mental health. That's what happened in Brazil. But it also may be that these two things, both mindfulness and ICT, are useful to people in a general sense on an ongoing basis, just to help them keep their lives in the place they want them to go, or maybe grow their lives in the direction they want to go. So I see this as an extremely positive opportunity to to maybe make a difference in a society right now that's really, really struggling. And clearly, the way we've been doing it hasn't been enough. So for us to figure out how to do better and more would be wonderful. And I think we're launched to do it.
Yeah, I feel excited about it. And the other thing that I think you're naming without actually saying it is, and I've been thinking a lot about this, is that these two modalities or multiple modalities that we're doing, if we think about a public health model and they have like that diagram with the kind of pyramid, we are a primary intervention that like anyone can participate in and start to build their resilience and build their toolbox for mental health. But we're also that secondary level. Like I have a little bit of a problem and I just need somewhere to talk about it, or I just need some extra tools to manage. So like it's both levels, and like we're not at the top of that pyramid where someone needs meds and really is severe and needs that extra help. We're not quite there. But even those folks could be taking advantage of these as
Absolutely.
supports in addition to those therapeutic interventions. And so like I feel like as we think about how do we create a healthy society, right? Individual and collective, right? Both levels, because it has to be both. Like this hits all of the levels in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the two other things I want to just say about that I'm extremely excited about. Um, One of them is that we are talking and thinking about how people handle and deal with their emotions and their feelings. And that's an absolutely necessary conversation that we do not have as a society and a culture. And one of the reasons is because we're so damn pragmatic that if we don't have a way to solve the problem, then we're not going to talk about it. But maybe now we have ways to at least address the problem by putting these two things together. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and this is just a point of just personal satisfaction, and I suspect some of the people on this podcast who are listening may feel that way, and maybe you as well. I am just so proud, and I think it's so cool that this is coming out of Pittsburgh. I just think that Pittsburgh and its gritty authenticity and its just real feeling, for us to be thinking and talking about how people feel in world, work in the world, and live in this world, is just a really cool thing, and I'm just excited about that too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably a great place to end this. And yeah, like the thinking about Pittsburgh becoming the epicenter of healing.
That's actually, it's interesting that you said it that way, because Quattrevara, the favela that I mentioned,
Hmm.
where ICT started, it's now a bricks and mortar community. So it's not a shanty town. It's not a bunch of cardboard boxes. It's actually bricks and mortar. The kids are growing up and going to college. And in the city that it's in Brazil, which is a place called Fortaleza, it's the largest city on the northeast coast, and I think it's the third largest city in Brazil, which means it's a pretty big city.
Hmm.
Quatro Vera is the place in that city where you go to participate in activities to achieve wellness.
That's it. That's what we will
That's
become.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Who would have
Yeah.
known?
Yeah. Thank you, Ken. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks, Steph.